Okay, and we are live. I'm starting the webinar now.
I'll wait until the participants climb. Luke? Okay. Okay, everybody, welcome to our webinar launch of our 2020 fall campaign called Recovering Together. My name's Rebecca and I'm Development and Pieces Animator in Southwestern Ontario, and we are so happy that you've decided to join us today to learn about our campaign this fall and of course to hear about what some of our amazing partners are doing to respond to COVID-19. This is a really important campaign that we've put together quite quickly to respond in a timely way, but also quite thoughtfully so that we can really do justice to the amazing work that our partners are doing. And we're so grateful that you're here to learn more about how COVID is affecting the world beyond our own borders. We're going to start with a little bit of house rules and tech tips. So we'll go to our next screen for that. So just to let you know that during the Q&A, you can click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to type your questions, and only the panelists and the moderator will see the questions. If you have any tech problems, you can just type them into the chat box and the moderator will figure those out. The public chat box we're actually going to disable for this session just so that conversations in the chat box don't distract from the main content. And if you do miss something, don't worry, the whole thing will be recorded. And of course, we encourage you to share the recording with other people who you know weren't able to make it or other people who you think might be interested as well. So we're actually going to flex our tech muscles a little bit right at the beginning, just to give us a chance to practice one of the features that we're using, which is a poll. So we're going to start a quick poll just so that we can see how far and wide everyone is coming from for today. So Luke is going to start the poll. So you can just let us know where you're joining us from today, either from the Atlantic, Quebec, Lebanon maybe, Ontario, the Western provinces, Yukon, Northwest Territories or Nunavut, or somewhere else. So we'll just give people a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll share our results in just a minute. Okay, so everyone should be able to see the poll results now. Most people, it seems, are coming from Ontario, but we have some people from the West and the Atlantic. So we have a coast-to-coast webinar, which is kind of nice. We do have someone from Lebanon, although I just saw on the tech side that panelists aren't able to vote. But there is someone from Lebanon here joining us, and I'm very happy for you to be able to listen to her today. I feel like we should have had a prize ready for people coming from the farthest. Maybe we'll send Rita a t-shirt or something. Okay, so we are just going to go over the agenda for today. We are going to start with a prayer just in a couple minutes, but then Luke Stockings, who's a Deputy Director in our Public Engagement Department, will be giving us an overview of the campaign in a global context. Then we have a couple very, very exciting guest speakers. We have Rita Ryan from Caritas Lebanon, who's going to talk about the situation in Lebanon. We have Anne-Catherine Kennedy, who's going to be telling us about how some of our partners in Brazil are responding. And then we have the launch of our campaign website after, which Luke is going to lead us through. And then we'll be talking about how we can actually take concrete action with this campaign at the end. So we'll get right into it. I'm sure you're all as excited as we are. So we'll begin with a prayer. And I'll just ask that you say this prayer along with us in the comfort of your home or wherever you're joining us from. So because it's the season of creation, we thought it would be appropriate to begin our session today with the prayer of St. Francis. So we'll begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, now I'm going to pass the floor, so to speak, to Luke, who's going to be introducing our campaign in a global context. So take it away, Luke.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and welcome everybody. I'd like to begin today by just setting the global context that we are launching this campaign in. And I have some slides quickly that I want to share. First, to put this Recovering Together campaign into a global context, as of 3:59 CEST time today, according to the World Health Organization of the WHO, there are 28,329,790 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and just under 1 million deaths, 877,000. I want to launch a poll because the place we are at from where we are here in Canada, we're wondering, is there going to be a second wave? We've kind of been thinking that we've been in this pandemic for a while, and in some cases people are slowly getting used to things, or we're thinking about, people use phrases like going back to normal. Are we going back to normal? How are things going? And really, it's important for us to consider the pandemic also from a global perspective. And so I'm going to just launch a quick poll here. And just to see, how many new cases do people think were reported to the World Health Organization for yesterday, September 11th? How many new cases globally of COVID-19 were there reported for September 11th? I'm going to launch that poll right now. Make your best guess. Flowing in there. And it looks like the flow of answers has stopped, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And you all must be following the news closely because you guessed, the majority guessed correctly. The number reported yesterday was, in fact, 287,968 new cases were reported of COVID-19 yesterday. And this slide here gives you a bit of a sense of how the pandemic has been developing from a global scale. It divides the world into the WHO regions. And you can see on that curve that the curve is, in terms of new cases, the curve is on a continual upswing and has been. So globally, we are nowhere near, as they say, flattening the curve. So things continue, the number of new cases globally is continuing to rise. And I think that's important for us to think about when we think of the global context that this Recovering Together campaign is launching in. Here you see it's not only the number of cases, but also the number of deaths are also continuously rising. And you can also see both in new cases and in terms of deaths that the Americas are a huge, huge portion of the global pie. So in the context of this global pandemic, right at the very beginning, people were already starting to think about what it means as we were kind of getting, adjusting to the end of it or the beginning of it. But we're already thinking about what does this pandemic mean? And what you're looking at is a cartoon by actually an editorial cartoonist from the Hamilton Spectator, in a nod to our facilitator there, Rebecca, who's from Hamilton. He developed this and published this particular cartoon on March 11th. And it actually went viral very quickly. So already March 11th is a significant date because that's when the WHO actually declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And right at that time already, people were already starting to think about the larger implications. And here he's putting behind the wave of the pandemic itself, the impact of the pandemic in terms of a recession. So this actually this cartoon went viral very quickly. And so I just want to let us think about, this cartoon was published in the context of Canada, and we are thinking a lot about recovering as Canadians, but it also has global ramifications as well too. And those global ramifications are quite dire. So I'm just going to launch another quick poll here. And there's a couple of questions for you to consider, 2 questions for you to consider on the impact of COVID. How many people could face starvation by the end of the year? That's the first question. And the second question, how many people could be pushed into poverty by the economic fallout of COVID-19? I'll let people contemplate those 2 questions for a bit and put your answers in. So from the very beginning, this cartoon shows that while we were immediately trying to respond and support frontline responders to the pandemic, from a health perspective, everything, we also, from the very beginning, as a society, have been thinking about what are the larger impacts and what are the larger lessons that we are learning, and where is this pointing us? And where is this pandemic pointing us? So people are, okay, it looks like the answers are slowing in there. So I'm going to, oh, no, a few more answers coming in, maybe a few more seconds. Okay, looks like the answers have finished. So I'm going to end the polling. And how many people could face starvation by the end of the year? We have a majority guess 265 million, and a majority guess that 500 million people could be pushed into poverty by the economic fallout of COVID-19. And in fact, we can see that the wisdom of the group has prevailed again. Yes, we are looking at a context where 265 million people could face starvation by the end of 2020, and that the economic fallout from COVID could push an additional 500 million people into poverty. Furthermore, only 1 in 5 people in low income countries are covered by any kind of safety net programs. Well, that reflection in that one cartoon that went viral actually expanded even further. And not long after that was going viral, somebody had actually doctored the cartoon to add a 3rd wave. And you can see that here on May 23rd, McKay himself, who liked what they were done, made it into an official McKay cartoon. And you can see a third bigger wave behind the recession wave, and that's climate change. And then by mid-June, it grew even further. And that cartoon now added a 4th wave, looking at the impacts of climate change, which would be total biodiversity collapse, potentially that huger wave. So there is this reflection, global reflection, that this pandemic is forcing us to think about big questions about how we can. Oh, and sorry to say that the photo in the bottom there, this cartoon has gone viral to the extent that even protests now, and this is a picture of a protest in London. The cartoon is turning up on banners at protests. So let's look for a second at the this larger reflection that the pandemic is focusing us on, as we are thinking about how do we recover, and how do we recover in the context, in a global context, with these particular challenges. The pandemic made us, a lot of us, as everything shut down, there were a lot of things going around the internet about how this is going to lead to a decrease in carbon emissions. And so that actually is one way the pandemic actually pointed a finger to the greater ecological crisis. Well, some studies are showing that April of 2020, when compared to April of 2019, there was a 17% drop in carbon emissions. Now, that sounds like a big drop, but to put it into context of how fast emissions have been growing, this past April was equal to the level of emissions in 2006 still. And then as things have been, quote unquote, opening up again, the decrease in June was a mere 5% from the previous year. So really the impact of the pandemic has been to get us to to reflect on. And now, as we are entering into a time of how are we recovering together, it's forcing us to ask very big questions about the solutions that we want as we move forward out of this pandemic and recovering together. And the predictions show that even as things are reopening, that there still will be an overall drop for 2020 for maybe up to 7%. But it'll be a slightly bigger dip they are predicting than the financial crash of 2008 when there was a dip, and also the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that said, again, the focus is that this pandemic is forcing us to ask questions, but the pandemic itself and the shutdown itself is not going to have any real impact on climate change unless we reflect on the kind of world that we want together and respond together. And that's the question: how are we going to surf these waves? We're not going to eliminate these waves that are coming. How can we minimize their impact and ride those waves and adapt to them as they come, so that the human family can ensure a sustainable future for this generation and future generations? Well, one way that we as Development and Peace look at those questions of how to ride these waves and how to make them as small as possible is from the perspective of our faith, and beginning with the bedrock of Catholic social teaching, which is the dignity of the human person. So everything we are doing in trying to respond to the pandemic as a global international solidarity organization is rooted in a response that focuses on the dignity of the human person. And from the dignity of the human person, we then have the further principles of Catholic social teaching of the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. These four principles of Catholic social teaching form the bedrock of our response, and these principles actually also manifest in the social teaching of the Church in many different teachings. Now, you probably can't see those teachings very well in the screen. It's all in white. So we often like to conceive of Catholic social teaching as a tree. So maybe we can see a little bit more there. So at the root of this tree, we have the dignity of the human person. And all of our responses are rooted in this, coming up then through the trunk of the tree into the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. And then the leaves of that tree, the teachings like peace, economic justice, creation care, participation, democracy, integral ecology, dignity of labor, all of these things through this tree that we try and grow, the fruit is the actual work that comes that you're going to hear about today in a very special way. And on that note, we're going to hear about some of the fruit in two particular of the work of recovering together and responding and the challenges of responding from two very special guests that we have with us today. And I'm going to invite Rebecca to now introduce our first guest.
Okay, thanks, Luke. So I am so happy to introduce you to our first speaker, Rita Rayam. Rita is the General Director of Caritas Lebanon, which is one of Development and Peace's most important partners in Lebanon. She holds a PharmD degree, a diploma in hospital and clinical pharmacy, and an MBA in health management. She's a passionate worker in the humanitarian field, and in 2011, she published her book, Accreditation of NGOs, Health Centers, as a result of her experience as the head of the health department at Caritas, which she did for 7 years. And she is currently pursuing her education in gender studies. And in addition to these things, she's too humble to write in her own bio that she's one of the nicest people you could ever meet. And she obviously does amazing work, and she does it with such integrity and steadfast. I feel so lucky to call her a friend, and if you asked me who my heroes are, she is honestly on the podium of this list, and I'm not just saying that because she's watching. It is sincerely, sincerely true. So we have a short video to show you before she begins speaking, and then Rita, the floor is yours. So Luke, you can start the video.
everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. First of all, Rebecca, thank you for your words. I'm really touched by the introduction. I hope that everyone can hear me because there's a problem in the internet. So I guess, and I hope that everyone can hear me clear and sound. This video, what you have seen, is a small brief of what happened in Lebanon on August 4th. If I'm gonna start by taking the cartoons that you have showed, the cartoon of the 4 waves, I'm gonna replicate it to the local context of Lebanon and talk about the 4 waves that we as Lebanese are facing. The first one is the impact and the spillover of the Syrian crisis on Lebanese, but as well as on the important number of Syrian refugees living in Lebanon. The second wave that we have to deal with is the economic crisis that we are facing now, where our currency has lost more than 80% of its value. The third wave is the COVID-19 that happened everywhere and touched as well Lebanon. And the fourth wave is the Beirut blast on August 4. This means that Lebanon and everyone living in Lebanon, whether Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, whether migrant workers, or Lebanese, are facing different forms of crisis. We're a country facing multiple crises, and we are trying our best to survive. With Beirut blast, everything has changed. Definitely with the COVID-19, we were able to work and to assist people, but the types that the work that we're used to do has completely changed on August 4th. August 4th, there have been a huge blast happening in Beirut. And August 5th, the nature of our work have completely changed. So immediately after the blast, our youth that we're so proud of rushed immediately to the hospitals to provide first aid assistance. And the second day, we put 2 tents, one in Ashrafi and one in Jummaizi, because our offices were completely destroyed. And we put those 2 tents and provide the services that were shown by the documentary. But to give you an overview about the situation, we as Lebanese are facing, as I said, multiple crises. Our currency has lost its values, and therefore there are many people who can no longer buy food or basic needs. There have been many people who have been laid off their job because we're facing a huge downfall on economic level. So the percentage of people without job has increased drastically. In addition to that, with the COVID-19, we have seen a complete lockdown for the country, a country that can't afford a lockdown due to the economic crisis. So people who are like taxi drivers, who are working on a daily basis, have been hit hard. In addition to that, after Beirut blast, the wheat silos have been completely destroyed. And we have witnessed a decrease in food intake after the blast, and an important percentage of people who have been pushed under the line of poverty. Today, we're talking about 50 to 60% of Lebanese people living below the line of poverty. Today, we're talking about 300,000 individuals who have completely lost their shelters. Among those 300,000, there are 100,000 children. And according to UNICEF, around 600,000 children are severely traumatized, seeing the disasters that we have been impacted by. Looking from a COVID perspective, looking at the health institution, 6 hospitals have been severely damaged, and around 20 clinics have been severely damaged in the ground zero, or at least in Ashrafi and Jummaizi, which now leave us to around 60% of occupational rate in the hospitals. In addition to that, and because our currency has lost its values, and because Lebanon is a country that imported basically everything from food to medication, the stock of medications that we have may last only for 1.5 months as a consumption. Last week, the president of the Order of Physicians has declared and said that there are many physicians and nurses leaving the country. This is an overview of the situation happening in Lebanon. And if we look only from a COVID perspective, COVID doesn't make the priority for us. There are people who have lost their houses. There are people who are completely impacted by the crisis. And we're trying and we're doing our job to help and assist them. So Starting to look at the COVID crisis, and honestly speaking, after Beirut blast, we completely forget about the COVID crisis. It wasn't among our priority. Yes, we were wearing masks, but we were wearing masks as well because they told us that after Beirut blast, probably the air is toxic. Yes, we were wearing masks, but we're not thinking about COVID. We were thinking about helping people. After Beirut blast, many people have lost hope, have lost their job, have lost their house, and have lost everything. Many people who were laid before laid off their job, and because we couldn't access as well the money in the banks, just withdraw everything they had from money, went to the stores, buy everything related to food, and stock it in their houses. Today, their houses are completely damaged. So in 1 second, people have lost their home, their job, their cars, and probably their lives, but as well as their neighbors and their friends. This is a situation in Lebanon, a situation that is a multiple crisis that we're facing. But I guess working in a humanitarian organization, one of the principles is never to lose hope. And every time we are here to build our country. It is so amazing. You go to the streets and you see the youth coming from everywhere to support people living in Beirut. It is so amazing when you see the international solidarity for Lebanon. And it is so amazing when you're part of an important confederation like Caritas and you immediately receive the solidarity messages from Development and Peace and from the whole Caritas Confederation. Looking at the just recovery and with the 5 principles that we have in a country facing multiple crises, honestly, it's a little bit difficult to decide whether health is only the priority, because there are people who cannot buy food. There are people who need shelter. There are more than 55,000 Lebanese and non-Lebanese students who have seen their schools completely destroyed. And therefore, they don't even have the online tools to access education, online education. In a country facing multiple crises, it's definitely hard to just distinguish the crisis that we're facing. It is an overview that we need to do, and it is a holistic approach that we're trying to do. After the blast, Caritas Lebanon has been there providing hot meals, but as well as food kits, as you've seen in the documentary. Caritas has been there to help people start to regain, I can tell, probably going back to normal as much as normal can be. We're there to provide home appliances. People need to start cooking again, and this is where now we're heading. We're here to provide mental health services. Mobile medical units are there to provide health services, providing as well emergency cash assistance, working on livelihoods, have been and being a very centralized country. There are many Lebanese who have lost their jobs because they work in Beirut. There are many Lebanese who have lost their firms because their firms are based in Beirut. This blast impacted Lebanon all over Lebanon, not only Beirut. It impacted us on a mental, but on a physical as well. So talking about the international solidarity, talking about the just recovery, I guess from a Lebanese perspective, it is hard to just now look at things and probably see on a longer term. On a short term, there are people who need to eat, who need to find a shelter, and who need to be sure that their non-chronic disease and non-chronic medications are taken care of, someone is taking care of. But in a longer term, definitely, just recovery is something really important. The access to the healthcare facilities, the presence of healthcare team is something really important. This is an overview of the situation in Lebanon, but I would like to end on a very positive note. Yes, our country is devastated and we're witnessing a protracted crisis, but seeing how people and how Lebanese people are resilient, seeing how Lebanese people have refused to leave their homes that were completely destroyed because they wanted to rebuild it and rebuild it immediately. This is an important signal that life continues in Lebanon, and that with the international solidarity, with the support of the international solidarity, we will be able to work and to rebuild our country again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rita, for the moving presentation and sharing the video that Caritas had created as well too. And we do have some time for our participants if that you have questions to put your questions in the chat box, and I will speak them out for Rita to answer. So please, we do have a little bit of time, and Rita's able to stay with us just a little longer to answer your questions. So please do go ahead and put some questions in the chat box if you have questions for Rita now. I can see that some participants are raising their hands to ask questions, and I believe the way to that we can get your questions answered is if you please type them into the question and answer box. So here is a first question, Rita, is that Armella asks, I recently heard in the news that there was a fire that destroyed international food aid. Do you know anything about this, and could you give us some details?
Yes, yesterday there have been a fire at the port again. Actually, the report so far is that the fire impacted tires and oil for cooking. There have been some reports as well as that the fire impacted as well the food that were coming to Lebanon to assist Lebanese people. So far, there haven't, at least I didn't get the chance to read at least officially what has been impacted. But nevertheless, we shouldn't forget that even the first blasts have already impacted the wheat silos, and therefore the wheat consumption of the Lebanese. Definitely, we're facing an important crisis when it comes to food. But I guess that we still need some time to figure out what have been destroyed by the fire and the impact of this fire as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Lisa. Has the government developed a recovery plan for Lebanon?
There is the Lebanon Flash Appeal, which is a recovery plan done by the UN agencies and local NGOs as well. The government, especially the army, is working on mapping the situation in Beirut precisely, especially when it comes to the shelter and the destruction. And according to this mapping, the Lebanese army are as well working in close coordination with the NGOs. And this will be more detailed in the upcoming days when the mapping is over, and when as well the coordination between NGOs and the Lebanese armies will be clear, and which NGOs will be taking which sector and which area as well.
Great, thank you. There's now, I'm going to combine two questions here, one from Louise and Katerina, who are asking, how has the international community's response been? Are they coming to Lebanon's aid? Is it enough to make a meaningful impact? And is the political situation in the country affecting the capacity to deliver aid?
The political situation in Lebanon is very unstable. And being unstable, this will definitely impact the security in Lebanon. However, regardless of this political situation, there have been a very important solidarity from the international community rushing to help Lebanon. So we have seen many in-kind donations sent to Lebanon. We have seen many countries as well helping in the investigation for the Beirut port blast. Many countries sending funds through different NGOs and through their embassies. There have been a very quick and important solidarity message from the international community. Is it enough to make a meaningful impact? The problem is that Lebanon is not only facing one crisis, as I mentioned. We're facing multiple crises. And with those crises, we shouldn't forget that there's still the refugees living in Lebanon, and they are in dire need of assistance. With the economic crisis as well, an important crisis started, which is the migrant domestic workers, because Lebanese couldn't anymore pay in USD dollars for the migrant domestic workers. They immediately just sent them to the street. And we have seen an important number of migrant domestic workers without shelters. So Caritas Lebanon as well took them into the shelters and make sure that everything is delivered in terms of protection. We cannot say that it is enough. Especially now that we're working only from a humanitarian emergency perspective only. We should as well focus on development and on rural development to make sure that we're not as centralized as we used to be. So the aids are there. Definitely there are people benefiting from the aid, but we need to think on a longer term. And for the time being, it is a humanitarian delivering basic assistance. How can Canadians help the people of Lebanon? Allow me first of all to thank the Canadians for their solidarity across the years. Since the Syrian crisis started, we have been able to receive an important funds from the Canadian government through development and peace. And the funds targeted the health assistance for the Syrian refugees, but as well as the Lebanese. And this is something that is very dear to our heart. How can you help? First of all, by continuously talking about the impact about the multiple crises in Lebanon. Because if we're not visible in the media, unfortunately, people will forget about this crisis. And this crisis is very important. Unfortunately, if you're a Lebanese and you open your Facebook account on a daily basis, you see people just leaving the country with the hashtag Beirut, you broke our heart, or Lebanon, you broke our heart. There's an important brain drain happening now in Lebanon, and we should keep talking about it. We should raise the awareness that we as Lebanese have received Syrian refugees. We have shown what it is to be a very hospitable country, but now we are really in need of assistance. Definitely lobbying for any fundraising events or sending funds from the Canadian government to the NGOs working in Lebanon is something really important. Focusing, as I said, not only on the humanitarian aspect only, but as well as on development. And I guess as well praying for Lebanon, praying for the Middle East, because if we look at the Middle East, we can see that the region per se is witnessing an important and multiple crises as well.
Thank you. There's we'll have maybe time for a few more questions. Thank you for putting them into the chat box, everybody. Felix is wondering in terms of specifically the response from other Caritas organizations in the Global Caritas Network. So we've talked a bit about the response from of Development and Peace as Caritas Canada. Have other Caritas organizations in the network been offering their solidarity? And in that context, what is the most critical support that Caritas Lebanon needs right now, and will the political situation in Lebanon allow you to meet those needs?
Well, as I said, the Caritas network as a huge confederation immediately deployed to assist Caritas Lebanon. And we have witnessed immediately after the blast, not only people from the Caritas family calling to check on Caritas colleagues in Lebanon, but as well as an important financial support. And they are trying in their countries to fundraise for Lebanon. So the confederation is very supportive towards Caritas Lebanon. Yes, we're able to deliver the services and to assist people, but I guess it is really hard to say what are the priorities because in Beirut, you need people to be more or less dependent and go back to their places. In other regions, you need to fight for COVID-19 and to provide as well the PPEs, the masks, the gloves that probably for someone else would say that this is normal. For us, for someone who have been laid off their job, for people who are now their currencies, our currency has lost 60 to 80%, as I said. So the priority is to feed your children rather than to probably wear a mask. Mental health is something really important. Just witnessing the disaster in Beirut and the impact that has not only on adults, but as well as on children. 600,000 children is not a small number. Those children have been severely traumatized. Looking at hospitals, we need our hospitals back in the city. Looking at the schools, we need our schools back in the city. We need as well to provide people with a social safety net. We need the people who have lost their job to check how they can sustain their family. So it's really hard to say what are the priorities, because we started to say that people should live in a dignity, and to secure the dignity, you need at least to sleep knowing that tomorrow there's food for your children, they are going to school, and your house is habitable. And this is difficult for people living in Beirut. Looking at the rural areas, there has been an important rural exodus happening many years ago, and now it's a completely brain drain from Lebanon. So I guess answering the question is really difficult for us. What are the priority? But the priority is food and health, I guess. So can people survive and plan for their future?
Mhm. Thank you. We have maybe one last question. So as you mentioned, there has been some support sent through Development Peace by the Canadian government, and also our our own funds that we've been able to raise. In terms of the Canadian government, Brendan wants to share with you that actually as a country, Canada, are planning to spend $140 billion on 15 warships and 88 fighter jets. And given that huge expenditure, you're seeing that really, how does this compare with the real needs that our neighbors, such as our neighbors like yourselves in Lebanon, have? And do you have any thoughts on how we can move more Canadians? You said keep sharing the news. How can we move people, and in particular our leaders, to focus on the real needs of people?
I've been to Canada probably 7 to 8 years ago, invited by Development and Peace. And I can honestly say that what I remember is that how Canadians are so sympathized with others' pain. And this is something really touching. And this is what I keep as a memory. I guess everyone can change the world. So what about moving together to change the world? It's not difficult, but we need the will to do so. And as I mentioned before, raising awareness about what's happening in Lebanon, not only focusing on what is in the media from the political perspective. Let's focus on the humanitarian perspective. In any crisis, there are innocent people who are paying the price. Let's talk about those innocent people rather than talk about the political crisis and who's going to win. After all, in every crisis, no one is winning. People are losing their lives, their jobs, their futures, and their dreams. So raising awareness about the humanitarian aspect is something really important. Demanding or at least advocating for projects that are implemented by different NGOs. I'm not talking only about Caritas Lebanon, but helping as well, supporting the country, technically supporting and financially supporting the country is something really important. And I guess this is very easy, especially that Canada is playing an important role here in Lebanon, and it is very admired and very respected by the roles that Canada is playing. So advocating for a better future, advocating for a future where everyone is living in dignity is something really important for us.
Well, there's also the question and answers box. Rita is flooded with people thanking you for your presentation, and we really are just so honored that given the acuteness of the situation in Lebanon right now and your role as the general director, we're so honored that you could take the time to join us today all the way from Lebanon and to share with us. So thank you so much for being here today and for yeah, for being willing to take time out of what I know must be a very busy schedule. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Development and Peace. And thank you, everyone watching now. It's really an honor for us as well to take time out of your schedule to hear about the crisis happening in other countries. And I guess this is what you're talking about globally, recovering globally. We need people to be aware of what's happening and to demand dignity for everyone. It's been an honor to be with you, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll jump back on. Thank you so much, Rita, of course, for your wise and inspiring words. And of course, I'll echo Luke. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And thanks everybody for your great questions. I wish we could have gotten to all of them. So we'll move on now to our next guest speaker, who I'm also very happy that you will have the chance to hear from. So next we have Anne-Catherine Kennedy, who is Development and Peace's International Programs Officer for Brazil and Colombia. She holds an MA in Political Anthropology with 6 months of field work in Brazil from Concordia University in Montreal. She's a DNP veteran. She's been with DNP for 15 years now, first as our International Programs Officer for Brazil, and then Brazil and Haiti, and now, of course, Brazil and Colombia. She's been working with social movements and social pastorals, especially peasant-based ones, since the year 2000, and she loves Brazil and its social movements. She even married a Brazilian and has a Brazilian baby who is almost 3 now, and I'm sure is very adorable. And she really, really knows her stuff. I know if I ever had a question over the past year, since we've been focusing our campaigns on the Amazon and Brazil, I always knew I could go to Anne-Catherine for a really well thought out, insightful answer. And I've always been really appreciative of how she's always willing to help and share her knowledge, which really played a pivotal role in forming our campaigns over the last year. So I will pass it over to Anne-Catherine now so that she can share her wealth of knowledge of the beautiful country of Brazil with all of you. So Anne-Catherine, take it away.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar and joining us. Everyone is very busy and it's the weekend, so it's nice that people care and want to listen, want to learn, and want to be a part of all that's going on. So when I say that I love Brazil, I love it for so many reasons. There's so many beautiful and awful things that go on there. I find Brazil, even though it's a very large country and it's continental, I find it's like a microcosm for understanding almost, maybe not every single type of social injustice, but just so many of them. So you look at Brazil and you can understand really clearly the situation of the peasantry and what's going on with agro-industry, the question of mining, the mining industry, extractives, indigenous, traditional communities. You can understand an awful lot about community organizing, social movement building, really interesting pedagogical approaches to social transformation, including kind of wild and crazy things like using theater to bring disenfranchised and oppressed communities to rally together to bring about social change and liberation. And the church is fabulously interesting also in Brazil. And this is how I want to start my talk today, is I want to explain or talk a little bit about a really important letter that was written by signed by 152 bishops not very long ago in the month of July, and it didn't get a lot of press for a variety of reasons, in part because we're facing a global pandemic and people are busy, it's summer, but also because it reflects political positions within the Brazilian church and tensions within the Brazilian church, which I think reflect tensions within the global church. And this is not something that people often like to hear about. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes us worried the church is divided and we think division is a bad thing. But, well, when there's divisions, it's because people don't agree with certain things that are happening and they have a responsibility, a duty to speak up. So this letter is called To the People of God. And it has been it was being worked on in July, and it was actually leaked to the press. We really don't know by who. It was leaked to the press, and so it became public before it had been, it had received the okay from the Brazilian Bishops' Conference. So this letter kind of came out before it was supposed to, which upset a number of people, including a number of bishops who had signed it, which shows just how delicate the whole situation is, because even those that signed it were okay with their signature being on there as long as the letter got the okay of the conference. But if it didn't, they weren't sure, and they wanted to be able to withdraw their name if such was the case, and well, they weren't given that chance because the letter was made public. They finalized the letter after it was made public, and they sent it to the Bishops' Conference, who says it does not represent the Bishops' Conference and represents just these 152 bishops. 152 bishops is a lot of bishops. It's almost a third of the entire Brazilian Bishops' Conference, so it's not insignificant. It's not a majority, but it's a lot of people, and the letter was also sent to the Pope. So this is a public letter that some people are saying is 152 bishops that are criticizing and attacking the president of Brazil. There are a number of facts that are stated in this letter that make the president of Brazil's supporters very unhappy and uncomfortable. The signatories of this letter stress that this letter is not an attack, really, or like a criticism to the president and the government. It's wanted to be a letter to invite to union, to a working together, to a togetherness, and not what we are presently seeing in Brazil very recently, acutely, but over the past couple of years, more and more sort of acutely, is a lot of tension, a lot of polarization, a lot of hatred, a lot of very violent talk, including coming from the very mouth of the president of Brazil, very discriminatory, very racist, very sexist, very anti pretty much all the most vulnerable populations you can think of. Indigenous people are spoken regularly very badly by the president and members of his government. The landless, the homeless, people with mental illness, with physical disabilities, women, Afro, Brazilians, Blacks, the poor in general are spoken about in very derogatory terms. And so these 152 bishops took the time to write this letter and to make it be known to, and sent it to the Pope, to signal that there is a problem in Brazilian society, that and that we need to bring about a new culture, a new way of speaking to one another, and things need to change. There was another letter that was sent out shortly thereafter, signed by over 1,000 priests from across Brazil, showing support for this letter. And this letter comes after 3 other pretty recent letters that were also penned by, in this case, the actual conference itself of Brazil. On the 30th of April, the conference published a letter talking about their how perplexed and indignant they were when they were seeing how the government was dealing with the COVID crisis in Brazil. I was going to get to that in a minute, but just so you keep in mind, Brazil is the second most affected in terms of overall deaths in the world after the United States. As far as I know from my most recent statistics, although I didn't verify like yesterday, but if they're not number 2, then they're number 3. And the whole crisis has been very poorly managed in Brazil since the beginning. So that was the letter on the 30th of April, penned by the Bishops' Conference, denouncing the lack of proper federal national management of this crisis and how there could just be so many people that are dying and nothing is really happening. There was also the 67 Brazilian bishops that are in the Amazon that penned, so this is not the Bishops' Conference, but 67 bishops that penned a letter to denounce the violation of indigenous and traditional communities' rights in the Amazon in the context of this COVID crisis, and how not only are they facing the constant pressures and dangers they always face, such as invasion of their territory, illegal logging, illegal mining, deforestation, fires that are purposefully set, invasion of cattle on their territories, and just the violence of having armed thugs come in and tell them, please, please just get off this land because we don't want you here, you're in our way. Nothing's being done to help with all of these pressures. But in addition, the disease is entering into their communities. There's all kinds of illegal and irregular invaders into their territories that are trafficking all kinds of things, that are bringing the disease closer to them, and they have no infrastructure, they have no real roads, they have no health services to speak of, and they're dying in isolation in the Amazon. And then the third letter was another one that was penned by the Bishops' Conference in July, and it was addressed to the National Congress of Brazil, denouncing how the president himself has vetoed a number of bills that were sent to that made it through Congress and the Senate, and then were vetoed by the president. And these bills were designed to be turned into laws that would give protections for Indigenous communities, traditional communities, and peasant communities in terms of a financial support, a bit like what we had with the CERB here in Canada, although much smaller, and other financial and social aids that are needed in these communities that are particularly vulnerable. And so I'm mentioning this because it's significant that there's just so many letters that are penned either by the entire Bishops' Conference or by significant portions of the Bishops' Conference about social issues and political issues that are divisive and that show a position. And so the church takes a position in Brazil. They might not like saying that they do, but it's quite obvious that they do, and they do it quite regularly. And I think that the rest of the world also does. The church around the world, locally, municipally, statewide, and nationally, continentally, internationally, takes positions, often saying that they don't, but they do. And in some places, it's more obvious than in other places. And the positions can be very clear and direct, such as saying, we denounce this type of behavior and we encourage something different. And other times, their political positions can be reflected in a support for an organization. So, for example, the MST, the Landless movement in Brazil, is a really important, historically important, politically important, socially important social movement that does such a tremendous amount of good in Brazil and in the world. And they're regularly attacked for being too much something, too much on the left, or for being not enough respectful of private property, or for being too into civil disobedience and not waiting for laws to be changed, as though these sorts of things happen by magic. You know, laws get changed because someone wishes it to happen. I am a big fan of the MST, and so is development and peace been over the past many years. And the MST has been recently criticized, but I would like to point out that very recently the MST received a thank you letter from the Pope and from Cardinal Czerny, thanking them for their solidarity in Brazil with the poor city folk because of the more than 3,000 tons of food that the MST has been donating since the beginning of the pandemic. So the church takes positions and sometimes sticks its neck out and shows support for certain initiatives and certain points of view and certain actors. I think in order to understand why it's so important that the church in Brazil is taking positions, even if it's not the official national conference and not every bishop, is what's going on in Brazil. You remember hearing about last year, all the fires, all the deforestation was going on in the Amazon, but we haven't, development and peace, has been speaking so much recently about what's going on in terms of mining. There's been in the past very few years 2 dramatic tailings dam failures in Brazil that caused the death of a few hundred people and destroyed 2 rivers and like entire sort of river basins. The environmental pollution, the deaths, the cultural and economic destructions that were brought about by these projects. These are ginormous projects that concentrate wealth, that concentrate resources and pollute the environment and treat people really poorly. And these types of projects are very much being encouraged in Brazil. They have been for a while, but this is becoming more so the case since since Bolsonaro was elected. And he's been basically elected on a platform that reinforces the power and privilege of the rich and the elite, and that is interested in cutting away the very few social protections that have been acquired with a lot of pain and effort from our partners over the past few decades since the end of the dictatorship in 1988. So it took a long time for certain protective measures to come into place in Brazil, and this whole system is being dismantled for a neoliberal model of the world and of economic development that really doesn't value human dignity and people and the planet. So we have, in Brazil, we talk often about BBB. If you do any research or reading on Brazil after the end of our webinar, BBB means bullets, Bible, and bulls, like cattle. So cattle ranchers and large landowners and deforesters and Amazon fire burners. BBB is a huge part of the Brazilian Congress, and even during the many years of the PT, the Workers' Party. Oh, I have a lot of sun in my face. Even during the many years of government with the Workers' Party, the Congress was controlled by these same people and these same families. So the Congress has been in the hands of this political and economic elite for a long time, and that doesn't seem to change even when we have changes in government. We have BBB, which means the Bible is making reference to fundamental, radical Christians that have grown in numbers and in political and social importance in Brazil over the past few years, and with their theology of prosperity. So those who are most economically prosper are those that are going to be rewarded more by God, and how prosper you are is an indication of how blessed and how good and moral a person you are. And so those who are poor are obviously not very valued, and they don't have a lot of morality. It's that type of thinking. And in the letter that the bishops wrote, and in the letter that the more than 1,000 priests wrote, they talk about this and they criticize the misuse of religion and the distorting of the word of God in order to promote basically an entire model of organizing the country that is anti-human dignity, anti-people, anti-communities, and that is anti-creation and anti-environment. And so if they're speaking about this, it's because there's so much land grabbing, there's so much water polluting, there's so much fire burning, there's so much Amazon loss, there's so much also urban poverty. The more than 3,000 tons of food that was given since the pandemic started by the MST was given to city folk that are stuck at home, they can't get out, they can't work, their jobs have stopped, or they can get out, but they can't work as much, they're not making as much money, they can't afford food. And at the same time, well, this is good for peasants because they have contact with city folk that can continue to maybe buy their produce in the future. It also shows that they're good, normal people and not evil communist radicals like they're often portrayed as being. And so with all this in mind, I would like to shift over to another partner, which is called Justiça nos Trilhos. Justiça nos Trilhos, Justice on the Rails. This is a NGO that's located in the Amazon of Brazil on the border with the Northeast and on the border with the Cerrado, and a very interesting region in terms of different environments that you can find, different biomes, different climates, different types of weather, different types of geography, topography, and different types of people that live there. This little NGO was created by the Combonianos of Brazil that are from Italy, missionaries from Italy. And Justice on the Rails works with communities in teeny little villages that are lined across the 800 kilometers of rail that connect this ginormous iron ore mine in the Amazon called Carajás to the port in the neighboring state of Maranhão, the port of São Luís. And so you have every day tons of trains that are passing. These trains are like 3 kilometers or 4 kilometers long they actually, when they stop, and they do often stop, I've seen it myself, they separate an actual town. Like you cannot go to the clinic, or you can't make it to school, or if a woman's having a baby, she can't get to the other side because this train is like 4 kilometers long and is breaking up the little town while some sort of hiccup is happening on the road, or while someone has their lunch. And so all day long, these extremely poor communities that face a lot of hardship and violence because they're trying to be dispossessed of their land and their resource constantly. So just their very presence there shows that they are trying to hold on to what little they have and their human dignity and their rights. All day long, they see wealth leaving the mine and traveling to the port where it is exported. And the pollution, the noise, the accidents, the deaths, the loss of cattle, but the loss of human lives when these trains come barreling through. The homes that have been broken because the vibrations are so tremendous that houses crack, infrastructure is broken. None of this is fixed. No one gets any compensation. The communities are just left there, and in fact, it would be better if they would leave. They have nowhere to go, and the pollution, the dust from these trains that are passing and bringing the wealth away from the mine and exporting it. Basically, there's no wealth that stays in any of these communities. They see it leave. And even all around the mine itself, you'd think that there would be wealth there because the mine is generating such a tremendous lot of wealth and has been doing so for so many decades, but it's one of the poorest regions of all of Brazil. So it shows that where you have an awful lot of wealth that's generated normally by natural resources in Brazil and many other places, this doesn't lead to any kind of local shared wealth or well-being. Let's not even call it wealth, just well-being, decent living, having the ability to eat, having health, having education, having a clean air that you can breathe, having a simple, happy life without luxuries. We're not talking about being wealthy. We're talking about being okay. People that live around these mega projects, in fact, even anywhere close to them, tend to live extremely poorly, showing that these types of projects do the reverse of what they claim they do. And so Justiça nos Trilhos is a long-standing partner of development and peace in the region, very active in REPAM, which is the REPAM stands for, it's the Ecclesial, Pan-Amazonian Ecclesial Network. And they're also very involved in Igrejas e Mineração, Iglesias e Mineria, which is churches and mining. So they are definitely very close to the prophetic, engaged church in Brazil that is passionate for social justice and social transformation. The bishops that are closest to Justiça nos Trilhos obviously signed the letter that I spoke about at the beginning, and most of them are friends with the MST and very much appreciate their work. And Justiça nos Trilhos works with these poor communities affected by this ginormous mining project and the train that passes through, and the endemic poverty in this region, and what they call enclaved economies, where you basically are totally dependent on nothing but the train passing and maybe selling, food through the window to the people that are on the train, or selling infrastructure, or cleaning the laundry of someone that's connected to the train. These economies that are completely dependent on the train and the mining economy. And so they're trying to work with the communities, help them to organize, help them to come together in an effort to defend their territorial rights, and they're allowed to continue to live there, but also not just be there under these horrible circumstances, but live there with dignity and actually contribute to society. And one of the things that they've been working on over the past few years is agroecology, and they visited different MST camps and settlements in different states around them, including a regional school in the neighboring state of Pará, to see how they organize their agroecological production, and how do they, what techniques do they use? You can want to be agroecological, but you actually have to produce, so you can't have too many pests. How do you deal with the pests? How do you transfer from a agro-industrial method of production to an organic one? How does this actually get done? How long does it take? What you have to do? And so they've been working on agroecology to try and allow these families that are affected by the situation that they're living in their territory to eat better, but also to produce enough food to sell some of it and to have extra income, and to also try and get others to stop producing with agro-industrial pesticides and herbicides, and to transfer to a more agro-ecological method of producing in the region, which would help to solidify the historical agricultural vocation of this region and the people that lived in it, and also protect the water, protect the land, protect the Amazon, and basically live in peace and live with dignity while serving an important role of feeding the towns and the cities nearby and taking care of the planet and creation. And so in the context of COVID-19, we were able to give a number of emergency supports in the month of May and June. And one of the organizations that received some what we call COVID-19 money is Justiça nos Trilhos. And what is really interesting is that the project that they presented and that we worked on sort of building together, because that's part of my job as a program officer, is to help the partners think of what they could do and think it through and help them build on the ideas so that we can come up with a project that makes sense and is actually realizable in its time frame and with the money that we have. And the project really unites their work with their traditional work in the region with the COVID-19 needs. So a part of the project was purely humanitarian, so the distribution of personal protective equipment, masks, gel, hand sanitation, and also emergency food baskets for the most needy. As people were really locking down, they weren't able to get out, people weren't able to produce, people weren't able to purchase. Even peasants don't eat only the food that they produce, they have to go out and get some things. And so that's a portion of the project. Another portion of the project is, in fact, the principal portion of the project is called the COVID-19 Observatory, which will, in the future, if things go how we're hoping they will, it'll get transformed into a popular observatory that won't have necessarily a theme, or that may have a theme that would change in the future. And the idea is here that community leaders get organized and train other community members to become also leaders, including a lot of youth, to be able to really report on what is going on in terms of COVID-19 in the region. Particularly in the case of the observatory, it's more tied to the city and the city of Asailandia. And they want to be able to know what is truly going on, because the government is so uninterested in fighting the pandemic and is so uninterested in knowing what the real numbers are, because it makes them look so bad. And we have more than 127,000 deaths in Brazil, and the number keeps rising. And many people believe that it actually suits the government, because it means that there's going to be less elderly for pension needs in the future. There's going to be less sick people that are going to be needing any kind of care, and there's going to be less poor people, because these are the people who are dying. And so it's going to be cheaper for the country. A number of people, including some bishops, are calling it really an outright genocide, because we're allowing the most vulnerable in society to perish. And the government, the state, doesn't seem to care very much. And so to find out actually what's really going on, so we can have real numbers, because the situation of fake news in Brazil has become so problematic that no one knows what's true anymore. So if you can have a real piece of statistics, some people say, well, that's not true, that's not what I read. I received something different on my WhatsApp, and that's not what I read. So to be able to have a space that is viewed as community run, and that is not tied to any political party or any government, and that is a source of real, proven, verified information on the pandemic, so people can know how to protect themselves. Who is really dying? How many have died in this region? Where are the outbursts happening? Are people having access to enough water and soap and gel to be able to keep themselves safe and masked? Like, what is actually going on? And in the future, we're hoping that this will continue to be a space where people are able to sort of fight fake news and have access to real information, depending on whatever the situation is that is becoming problematic, whether it's a real increase in forest fires, whether it's a real increase in land grabs, or more attacks on democratic institutions, which we've seen a lot of also recently in Brazil, with the president himself, reminding everyone that he was a big fan of the dictatorship in Brazil. And one of the biggest problems of the dictatorship in Brazil was that they tortured people instead of killing them outright. And now we have to deal with the fallout of having all these survivors, and they've had children, and some of them are still alive, and they're bringing radical ideas, and they should have just been taken care of. And he's encouraged people, the president, to demonstrate unmasked and in large gatherings during the pandemic against the Congress and basically against the democracy in Brazil, saying that we need to have a more authoritarian, dictatorial type government for now to bring order into the country. So the third element of the project with Justiça nos Trilhos, Justice on the Rails, is support to the agroecology school and farm that they've been building over the past few years so that it can continue to grow and serve as an inspiration. And people can see, well, look, it's possible to grow here in this climate, these things in an agroecological fashion and actually make money and eat well and have more money to be able to purchase whatever it is that you need to buy. And so the project ties in their historical agroecological work, the problem of fake news and of attacks against democracy in Brazil that have been coming for a while and that have become very heightened with COVID, and the humanitarian needs at the moment that can't be ignored, and that the community itself can be organized in a responsible way to take care of in terms of distributing the materials. And so, and I want to remind you that Justiça nos Trilhos is very close to bishops, very close to regional chapters of the National Conference of Brazil, is very close to REPAM, which is the Pan-Amazonian Ecclesial Network. It's a very church-related NGO that has a political position on just about anything that you ask. And in fact, they're courageous enough to assume their positions, but not everyone always is. And so I think I'm going to stop now and leave some time for questions, but my takeaway really is, or the takeaway I would like you to take away with, is that the church is important. The church is us, and the church is important, and it lives for real. And you can witness it doing tremendous things, and our support for it is really important. Thank you. I don't hear you, Luke.
Oh, there. You hear me? So we have a few questions in the chat box for you. The first comes from Keith, who says that, like you, Brazil holds a very large place in his heart, and he particularly admires the MST that DMP has known for so many years. Could you tell us of the challenges, and you did speak to this a little bit, the challenges that social movements in Brazil, many of them our partners, are facing? What are those in terms of like threats or worse at the hands of the present day Brazilian government?
Yes, that's a really good question. There are so many. I took some notes and I actually didn't really communicate them. It's hard to know where to start. I think that we have, Brazil has been for the past, I think, close to 10 years in the top 3 worst countries for a number of deaths of human rights and environmental defenders. So they're killed. They're being criminally, legally prosecuted, they're being criminalized, they're being spoken of in really derogatory terms by the government and by the elite and by the media. So they're being defamed and spoken of in bad terms so that there's not a lot of public support for their work, which is often misunderstood by the average Brazilian. But in addition, they're being bumped off, they're being killed, they're being threatened, they're losing their lives. So that's a tremendous thing that is going on that the government could do something about, and it doesn't. It doesn't provide protections. It doesn't denounce these actions. In fact, the discourse, the narrative, all the speeches, or not all, but a number of the speeches you could hear from Bolsonaro seem to sort of encourage people to speak and act in violent and aggressive ways against social movements, because they're being really portrayed as the enemy of order, the enemy of democracy, the enemy of private property, the enemy of a rigorous, organized society. And they're like the riffraff. This is how they're being portrayed. And it's been a long time they've been portrayed in this way. And some people really believe that this is how they really are. There's different reforms that have gone through in the past years. There's been the pension reform that has made it so that you have to work much longer and be much older before you can retire. Most poor Brazilians won't make it to the legal age in order to be able to retire. They're going to die before. So you're going to work your whole life and never retire. This is something that's happening. We have labor laws that are being flexibilized so that it is easier to hire people contractually and not give them their social benefits. So that it's easier to say that this is just a stagiaire or a contractual person, even though they've been there for years and years. You have, in terms of indigenous communities, for instance, in traditional communities, not just indigenous ones, because we have also like the quilombolas, which are the Afro Brazilians, and you have the seringueiros that we were speaking of last year, the rubber tappers, and other traditional communities that live not only in the Amazon, all around Brazil, that are facing more and more pressures and more attempts in order to legalize mining and extractive industries in their territories against their wishes, or even with their wishes. But it's illegal at the moment. You can't do it. And the present government wants to change that. And it's one of its electoral platforms, really, is to make those areas open for business. I think also in terms of the peasantry, it's just awful. I mean, it's awful what's happened. Almost all of the programs to in any way support or protect the peasantry a bit, the whole structure, the whole system has been destructured. So crop insurance is just about unattainable for peasants. There are technical assistance to help them to be able to produce, not all peasants know about every single type of soil or every type of produce, and then there's droughts, and then there's over rain, the weather's changing, so technical assistance, that's out the window. Trainings, access to cisterns, to be able to have water cisterns that are paid for by the state to allow peasants in drought affected or semi-arid regions be able to have water systems so they can have water for their consumption and for their production. That's been taken away as well. And in fact, there was a bill, so like a project of a law that was sent to Congress. It was passed by Congress without any modifications, and it was passed in an urgent manner. So it was quickly passed through, and it made it to the Senate, where it was also quickly passed through. And it is a series. It's a law that has a series of sort of subcomponents to it, designed to help the peasantry in the time of COVID, because Indigenous communities have been they're not receiving the little bit of public help that is being given by the Brazilian state. It's 600 reais, so it's like about 140, I think, Canadian dollars a month, which really doesn't give you very much in Brazil, particularly in a city where like a rent can easily be like 1,200, 1,400 reais, for a really simple, small place. So 600 reais is not a lot, but it's something. It can help. So peasants are not able to access it. Indigenous people are not able, because the president has vetoed their participation in this program. And a lot of people think that, well, Bolsonaro didn't want to have a public financial support for citizens during the pandemic. He didn't want one at all. And then he was, his base encouraged him, said, you really have to. You're going to have to do something, because people can't stay home, and he doesn't really want them to stay home anyways. But it just made him look too terrible. So he proposed 200 reais, which is, something like $60, which really was an insult. People were like, well, nothing can happen with that. And so his own base said you have to make it at least 500. And then at the last minute, he made it 600. So he's now gone down in the history, at least of his supporters, as having been the one that brought about the 600 reais. So he's the good guy in this story. But the most organized poor can't access it. And it's the disorganized poor that can. And this is going to help him get reelected. And this is also going to help so that the most organized poor end up by being more affected by this pandemic. So you can think that, peasants should be doing okay if they're like, socially isolating or distancing. And in this case, in Brazil, in some places, we're really talking about socially isolating because there's just so much COVID that they're not just like being careful, they're staying home, they're staying in, is that they've lost access to their ability to sell. All the fairs, all of the access to markets is disappeared, so they can't sell their stuff. And so they can't make money. And so if they can produce a lot of certain things, they don't produce everything they need. And they do need to buy some things, including, books and medicines and, clothing. They don't just eat. Peasants are normal people. They have multiple needs. And this is why it's so beautiful to see the MST saying, well, what we're going to do is if we can't get access to markets, we're going to organize ourselves and do donations. And that's what they've been doing, 3,400 tons of food being donated to the peripheries. So the poor, here we live in a world where the suburb is kind of well-to-do. In Brazil, the suburbs are not at all well-to-do because they're far from services, they're far from jobs. It's like sort of the slums on the outside. And so they've been donating all this to the poor peripheral people in cities that they're all informal workers. Their jobs have disappeared or dried up, and they can't make it. And it shows that the support that could be given the peasantry is needed, the 600 reais that they're not receiving. And it shows that their ability to help the city is still there, despite the fact that they continue to have needs of their own, and their tremendous generosity and solidarity, is impressive. And it's nice that Cardinal Czerny and the Pope have recognized their efforts and sent them a thank you letter that I don't know what language it originated. I just saw it in Portuguese. So I don't know if there's an English version of it, but it's very short and simple, but very beautiful. Because these are poor people that are struggling to have public policy brought about that will make their lives a bit better and that would help them to realize an important job, which is to bring about food sovereignty in Brazil. And they are constantly being harassed and assassinated and criminalized. And despite that, they're still helping others that are worse off than themselves.
Thanks, Anne-Catherine. I think I'm just noticing the time is now actually 4:34, so we're past time. What I'm going to suggest, because I think there are probably a lot of people who would like to continue the conversation, is we're going to kind of, the great thing about a virtual thing is no one's here to kick you out, so we can hang out here as long as we want. But I think we're going to sort of wrap things up, and then we'll maybe come back, and anybody who wants to stick around and continue this conversation, we can do that. So at this point, we have kind of taken a look at the global context, and then we've gone into focus with Lebanon and the impact of a humanitarian crisis in the form of an explosion and the many waves underneath that Rita spoke about today, and our efforts to support Caritas Lebanon as a member of the Caritas family in their response. And we're also working with other Lebanese partners as well too. And there's a lot on our website. You can see specifically, even more specifically, what we've been supporting. And then also what Anne-Catherine has just shared in another epicenter of the pandemic in Brazil. What we would like to do now to end the webinar is to just point you towards a few actions. And we're not going to spend a lot of time doing that because one of the main actions we would like people to take from coming out of this webinar is to get connected to the local trainings that will be happening, led by our animation team, animators like Rebecca, coast to coast, and information about when those webinars and trainings are taking place will start being posted on our website. You'll be able to find it the same place where you could see where to register for this webinar. So they'll be localized around how you can organize to really take action on this Recovering Together campaign. So today was, in Catholic social teaching, we speak of a methodology called See, Judge, Act. And today's webinar is really the C portion. And so we hope that you will also join us in the kind of judge or reflect and act by going to a local training. But just a very simple few things around action and what that, to give you a taste or a flavor of what that action is going to look like. Today, as part of the launch of the campaign website or web page is being launched. And so I'd like to share with you and give you a very quick tour of that website. So I'm going to just share the website that we are launching today. So if you go to Development and Peace, devp.org, the first thing you're going to see is the Recovering Together. Again, for our more local trainings, there should eventually be a button here that you'll be able to press to find when the local trainings are happening that you can join. And if you go to our Recovering Together campaign website, the first thing you're going to see is also a little video, and I'd like to share that video with you now. So there you have a quick little video, and that video, this can be downloaded or viewed on our YouTube channel. So please do share it with others as we begin this Recovering Together campaign. On the campaign website, you scroll down and there are really 3 different actions that we're encouraging people to do in participating in this campaign. So the first is in the area of fundraising. You heard today about what we as Development Peace are able to do in offering our solidarity to our brothers and sisters around the world in Lebanon and Brazil specifically. And we need your help to be able to raise the funds in order to continue that solidarity. So that's the first section. And if you click here, you will see under the fundraising place, we, in addition to doing a number of dioceses are doing collections to make up for a collection that we missed during Lent because of the pandemic in our churches and parishes. And though we are also inviting people to set up personal fundraising pages. So this is a very simple way that people who want to support the efforts of Development and Peace can tell people and encourage others, their friends, their family, to do that. And we're doing that through an online fundraising initiative called Spreading Solidarity. And there's a little video clip about that right here. So in order to set up a fundraising page, it's very simple. At our website, you simply go here and you click create a fundraising page, and we'll follow through the steps. For those who are not used to or accustomed to setting up online fundraising pages, within the next month or two, we will be offering a technical training for people who are interested to set up a fundraising page but aren't really sure how. And so you can join that training, especially if you come here and you try, there's a lot of instructions on how to do it. And if these don't work for you, you can come to our technical training. So we're encouraging people to fundraise for us. The next action that we are focused on as well too is taking action together for a just recovery. And we've signed on to the 6 principles for a just recovery. And there is also a link to the Just Recovery for All website that we've signed on to that lists all the different principles, and there you have them there, and encourages people to take action and advocate for a just recovery based on these principles. And while the Just Recovery Initiative is an initiative of wider civil society, we also, through taking action for a just recovery, are promoting an initiative, an ecumenical or faith-based initiative called For the Love of Creation. And this is a growing initiative. We actually have there's not a website even yet. They're hoping to launch the website in October. But there is a Facebook group. So if you search For the Love of Creation, and one of the first initiatives that we've taken as part of this For the Love of Creation is to invite people to sign a petition, a parliamentary petition sponsored by a Toronto-based MP, Nathaniel Erskine Smith. And on our website, you can actually just click the link here to sign it. So if you simply click that link, it will take you to this petition. And this petition outlines the objectives of the advocacy objectives of For the Love of Creation, that we are calling on the Canadian government to commit to reducing Canadian greenhouse gas emissions by 60% below 2005 levels by 2030. While investing in a just transition to a fair, inclusive green economy that creates good, secure jobs and promotes the well-being of everyone in Canada. To honor the rights of Indigenous peoples by animating the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, particularly in the context of climate policy, energy policy, and infrastructure development, key to a robust and functioning right of free and prior informed consent is legislative implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The third point is to commit equal support for climate change adaptation and mitigation measures in the Global South through international climate financing mechanisms, with additional funding for loss and damage scaling up to a fair share contribution of at least $4 billion per year. And finally, to respond to the pandemic in the Global South through multilateral debt cancellation and increased grant-based support for Canadian international NGOs. It's open for signature until October 6th. So we have 1 month to push this. It's currently at 769 signatures. And Rebecca, you might be able to throw up a link to the petition in the chat box for everybody if you want to sign today. But we really encourage people to sign this. Once that petition expires on October the 6th, based on the same demand, we'll be inviting and encouraging people to approach their own MPs and try and develop petitions on this using these same points. You're also encouraged, if you are part of any groups, to use the demand of this petition to approach your own MPs about sponsoring a petition or putting the same forward. The more MPs that bring these demands forward to the House through petitions from Canadians, the better the initiative that For the Love of Creation is standing for, the better chances it has of success. So there's that element as well too, and we hope you will all sign that petition today. People can also take our intergenerational pledge. So to take in not only political action personally, but also taking action in our own lives and changing our own lives. So this is a pledge that has been active since last fall that we started. So people are encouraged to check out that pledge as well too, and to sign it if you haven't. And there may be some people on the webinar right now who would recognize their own photos here, because a lot of our members and supporters across the country have been participating in this pledge initiative for the last year. So people are also encouraged to do that. And then finally, the third thing that we're inviting people to do is to pray. Praying with and for all of those who are experiencing the worst impacts of COVID-19. And we have a campaign prayer that we invite people to pray. And we can actually close this webinar with that prayer when we're completely finished. But before we move to the prayer, I just want to remind people again that today, this little piece about the action you can take, this has been just a very quick overview, but the real action that we hope you can take is to learn more about these things, these actions at a local training. So you can sign the petition today, but don't let that be the only action you take in this Recovering Together. Get involved with our fundraising efforts for the campaign to support our partners. Get involved through all the different aspects of a just recovery, and join us in prayer. So we are going to wrap up shortly. I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca in a moment, but I'd like to just end this bit on action with that last concrete action of prayer. And before we get to the prayer, even though we are gathered virtually, and so we are here from in many different places, as you saw from the poll, across the whole country. And so often when there is a physical development piece event, we begin with a land acknowledgement. We didn't begin with a land acknowledgement today because our chat box was closed. And what we would like to do though, is I'm going to open the chat box. And so before we pray, I'd like to invite anybody who would like to type in a land acknowledgement so you can acknowledge the land that you are on, where you are joining us from, in the chat box. And so we will have a virtual land acknowledgement now in the box before we do a final prayer. So I'm just going to open the chat box now. And now people should be able to type into the chat box for everybody to see. And so we invite you, if you know the land acknowledgement for the land that you are currently on, to please offer it for everybody in the chat box. So the chat box is open, and we'll just leave that in a moment as we recognize that the land that we are on. And we recognize that in making these land acknowledgements, that in order for them to be meaningful, we have to be committed to justice for Indigenous peoples in Canada, committed to their struggles and stand with them actively, which, as you saw in our For the Love of Creation petition, is an important aspect of the demands that we are making as well too. So we recognize, as these acknowledgements are being made in the chat box, that we must also not only speak these acknowledgements, but acknowledge it in our actions in supporting and being present and active in the work of building justice for Indigenous peoples and building reconciliation in our country. And out of this moment, we will close with the prayer that makes up for the Recovering Together campaign. And the prayer comes from the Urbi et Orbi address, the special blessing that Pope Francis made in the rain in St. Peter's Square that went across the world. So we will pray that now. And Lord, in this world that you love more than we do, we have gone ahead at breakneck speed, feeling powerful and able to do anything. Greedy for profit, we let ourselves get caught up in things and lured away by haste. We did not stop at your reproach to us. We were not shaken awake by wars or injustice across the world. Nor did we listen to the cry of the poor or of our ailing planet. We carried on regardless, thinking we would stay healthy in a world that was sick. Now that we are in a stormy sea, we implore you, wake up, Lord. Lord, you are calling us to faith, which is not so much believing that you exist, but coming to you and trusting in you. You are calling on us to seize this time of trial as a time of choosing. It is not the time of your judgment, but of our judgment. A time to choose what matters and what passes away. A time to separate what is necessary from what is not. It is a time to get our lives back on track with regard to you, Lord, and to others. In the face of so much suffering, where the authentic development of our peoples is assessed, we experience the priestly prayer of Jesus, that they may all be one. Amen. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rebecca, to close us off, and those who want to leave will be able to leave, and then we can get back to the Q&A.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Luke, for your part of the presentation, and thank you so much to all of you who are joining us today. We hope you are as motivated as we are to run this campaign. So please do have a look at our campaign web page, which is live now. Have a look at the materials, share them widely with your family and your friends, and of course, get in touch with your local diocesan council or animator if you do have any questions. So it is going to look a little different this year, but because we're doing things differently, it's an opportunity to reach people in a different way. And so we'll be able to reach even more people and share the work and messages of our partners to new people. Thank you again for joining us today, and we all look forward to working with you over the next couple of months to bring this campaign to life and to reach as many people as possible. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, so now I guess, usually when we're gathering in person, one of the things that we miss with virtual gatherings is, when you're gathering in person at the end of the event, people hang around, they talk, they can ask questions of the panelists that they didn't get to ask during the actual presentation. And virtual events are always like so sudden, they just end. So I guess we're now in the phase of like that after the official presentation time. So I can see there's still a number of people who are hanging around, and there's still quite a number of questions. So maybe what we can do is just go back. And Anne-Catherine, I don't know how long you're willing to hang out with us here, but I'm just gonna bring up get to some more of the questions that we didn't get to. Somebody has asked, in terms of when money is offered in solidarity through organizations like Development and Peace, or from Canadians to when money is sent to Brazil for the poorest of the poor, what are the safeguards that are in place to ensure that all the funds get to where the needs are? So I'll let's get to that. Let's reopen the conversation with that.
Okay, you can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super. I think that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure if there's any back ideas to that question, but I think that needs, you want the funds to get to where the needs are. Well, the needs are assessed. They're assessed by the partner in question that's in dialogue with the communities, the people that are suffering whatever social injustice and situation that is needing change. And so the needs are assessed by a actual partner or by a soon to be future partner, in case it says something new. And well, then we will dialogue, you know, either we'll receive a project already, or we'll receive an email that says, this is what we're living. Are you guys interested? Do you work in this region? Do you work on this theme? Do you have any money? Who could we work with? And so we talk, you know, and so we talk by email, we can talk by Skype, we can talk by WhatsApp. And sometimes we are able, through talking without meeting one another, to realize that we have a common assessment of the needs in this region. This is a region that we work in. This is a topic that we work on. We agree with the analysis that this organization has come up with to explain the situation and to explain what they plan on doing to remedy it or to improve the situation. If we don't agree, we say we don't agree, and we either part ways, or we say, you know, we don't really agree, you ignore this, or you didn't talk about that, or we don't really think that this is as important as this other thing. And we talk and we dialogue, and it's a big part of the job of a program officer to kind of help organizations to think their analysis and their projects better, you know, in some cases, because sometimes they have a lot of preconceived ideas in their heads that they haven't really written down. So sometimes they don't realize how important it is to make those ideas more explicit so that we can really understand where their thinking is coming from. And in some cases, it's because they actually need the help. You know, they're not necessarily experts, and even experts make mistakes. And we also talk to partners or allies or organizations and people that we know. Say we're taking Brazil for an example. Do they know this organization? You know, what do they think of this organization? Are they reliable? You know, have they been involved in in fraud or corruption? You know, are they trustworthy? Where are they on the political spectrum? You know, who are they really working for? So there's a lot of investigative work. It's a lot of fun. It can take a long time. And sometimes we have to visit. Sometimes we're not satisfied with dialoguing and speaking, and even speaking to our allies. And our allies could be partners. They could be consultants that we know on the ground, but they could also be other CIDSE organizations, Miserior in Germany, you know, CCFD in France. You know, do they know this organization? What do they think? What has been their experience? So that we can feel that we're working with a trustworthy organization. And if we feel they're trustworthy, then we can explore more if we're in disagreement, or if we're not sure that the needs have been properly assessed. And then, so like the safeguards that's really what the safeguards are. It's like, it's this dialogue, it's the building together of a project. And it's eventually visits, right? Because we will visit. If we don't visit before the project is approved, we'll visit after. There's reports. There's also there's reports throughout the life of the project, and then there's final reports. So it depends how long the project lasts. But I mean, if it's a new organization, normally we do a 1-year support for a first year, and then we may do another 1-year support for a second year. And sometimes we even do a third year of just 1 year until we feel that we really can work together on a more long-term basis. And then there's just our constant antenna. Even though we've done all of this forward work, our antenna are always alert to anything that could be weird or fishy or strange. Organizations can change, new people can come on board. Things are in movement and in flux all the time. So it's fabulously interesting, because it's never the same. There's not a formula, there's no recipe. You have to be a bit of a detective, you have to be a bit of an anthropologist, you have to be a bit of a psychologist, you have to be a bit of a social worker. You have to try and pick up any piece of information you can, and you read articles, you see social media, you know, you try and see if what they're saying fits with the reports, fits with what other people say. And we're, you know, constantly verifying, not that we're constantly in doubt and not trusting, obviously. I mean, at the beginning, we don't know who people are. You give people the benefit of the doubt, but you talk, you know, and then you assess. And so we don't stay sort of in a position, say, of distrust, but we're always just attentive to make sure that nothing's changed. And I can just give a silly little example, but we worked for a number of years with the peasant organization in Paraguay that we really appreciated for a number of years, and they were really important for a number of years. But they started getting larger and larger financings from different organizations in Europe that were very interested in agrofuels, and kind of got them to produce cotton and other sort of plants for for export. They weren't addressing food sovereignty needs. They were trying to export stuff, and they were interested in doing biofuels. We're like, this is not how we think the peasantry in Paraguay is going to get out of its rut. And and we, it took a number of months. I wasn't really the lead on this project, but it took a while before we had to decide we were pulling out, and we couldn't work together anymore because we didn't see eye to eye politically, and we certainly weren't going to finance the exporting of cotton, for whatever it was, when there were much more important needs that weren't getting addressed anymore by this peasant organization. So we always have to be alert, even though we feel we've done sort of the best we can at the beginning. It doesn't ever stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, speaking of Paraguay and cotton, I remember being on a solidarity trip in Paraguay with DMP and meeting a farmer who actually had been convinced to put his whole land into cotton and invested everything in it. And then when he had his crop, the price of cotton fell through the floor, and he was basically left with a worthless crop, and you can't eat cotton.
No.
And the partner who was working with him while we were there was helping him to kind of adopt an agroecological approach to recovering his land, and he was now able to feed himself and his family, and they were selling at markets, local markets, and like advancing those goals of food sovereignty. I think also, I mean, you went into quite detail, but also a lot of people generally who kind of just, I think in the general public, who look to charities and question them, like, does the money really go where they get to go? There's like you described in detail how partnership works, and a lot of people just actually don't really have a concept of, I think in the general public, of effective partnership as a way to ensure that the solidarity of Canadians is effective. Like some of the partners that you've been talking about, these are relationships that exist between our organizations for over 20 years sometimes. And so when a Canadian makes a donation to, say, to Development and Peace, and we are using those donations to support these long-lasting partnerships with high degrees of trust, that is a huge, I think, sort of just concept that people generally still need to become aware of in terms of how to ensure that the generosity of Canadians is effective in terms of reaching the people, as our guest was asking. There's another question here also about Felix was saying, it doesn't mean to sound so gloomy, but what practical hope or solutions are there for the Amazon and the dispossessed in Brazil if Bolsonaro still seems to enjoy such popular support? And how can that be turned around both from the inside and the outside? He says it almost sounds desperate. And again, he apologizes for sounding so gloomy, but he wants to know, is there any real optimism, or have there been any recent social justice victories that you've seen or that our partners have seen?
Question. It's really broad. So like Amazon and all of Brazil. I can say that Bolsonaro won't be there forever, and our partners know that. They know right now it's a difficult time. It's difficult for their physical security. It's difficult for their financial sort of ability to get stuff done, and it's difficult to speak to people, to have like solidarity in the country, because there's just so much negative discourse about what social movements are and what they do. And Bolsonaro supporters, most of them really don't like NGOs or social movements, and they don't care much for peasants, and they don't care much for, it seems, many communities and populations in the country, particularly those that are like poorest and most vulnerable. So there's like a consensus that it's difficult to have a lot of amazing big scale victories at the moment. It doesn't mean that you stop working, but you can work more outside. So you can work with your allies to try and encourage them to show you even more support, which can help to prevent your people from being assassinated. When you've got eyes that are watching globally, assassins are less likely to kill, or at least they'll kill fewer people, because they'll be afraid that they'll get You know, there'll be media attention that'll get drawn to the case. It serves as bad press for Bolsonaro, so it's not such a hot idea, you know. So like all of this is calculated, as callous as it all sounds. It's obviously you always have these rogue assassins that'll just kill whoever they want, but they're hired thugs, these people. They don't just sort of wake up and say, I feel like killing some peasant leader, you know, they're hired by someone. So like, is it strategically, politically strategic to assassinate this certain leader in this place or not? There's a lot of international attention and solidarity that is on these cases. We'll then know, you know. So that's something that they do. They also are working in the case of, say, extractives in general, so agro industry and also mining and gas. They're looking at working with their allies. So again, outside, you know, working with their allies, say development and peace, say NGOs, anywhere in the world that they are allied with, ask them to participate in and support international campaigns, say to defund deforestation, defund land grabs, you know, pension funds that are financing land grabs in Brazil and elsewhere. You know, we can do something about that. You know, we can have ginormous gains during Bolsonaro against this, you know, so there's a lot that can be done outside. Inside is a relatively depressing time, it is true. Although our partners are not depressed, it amazes me. And occasionally I do get depressed or gloomy and I feel bad afterwards because it's like, you're just not allowed, you know, and if they're not getting gloomy and depressed, like we really shouldn't, you know. I'm gonna just, because we have time and we've already gone a bit over time, I'll just open up a little parenthesis here that I think is worth sharing. A number of years ago, I was at the first international gathering for the the first international gathering of the MAB, the movement of people affected by dams, hydroelectric dams, and the energy sector in Brazil. And I forget exactly the date. It was a couple of years ago, 2007 or 2009. I can't remember, in Sao Paulo, and there was over 1,000 people there, including international guests, and there were a number of really well-known speakers. And I can't even remember who it is at the moment, you know, because of confinement and being at home with a 3-year-old. My brain is sometimes, it's hard to retrieve older information, it seems, but can't remember who it was. Was it Frei Beto or another sort of theologically based liberation theology supporter of the MAB and the MST and all the peasant organizations of the Via Campesina in Brazil, who gave a really interesting, short and punchy speech saying that you've got people that get involved in the MAB or the MST or whatever movement, you know, where they're really at the front. You know, NGO work can be cleaner because you're behind a desk, you're in an office, you can still get targeted and still get bumped off, but it's safer. It's safer. You know, it's not as physically endangering and it's not as emotionally draining. It's not as hard on your body and on your soul as being on the front lines of a social movement that is fighting actually physical violence and expropriation and land grabs and pollution and stuff like that. And so he was saying that you can get involved in these movements. You know, why do people get involved for so long? How does that work? How do people stay for decades involved in a movement when they're facing all these hardships? Why don't people give up? You know, and he's like, you know, some people get involved because they have needs and their families have needs and they're maybe neighbors and you know, friends have needs, and like, this isn't right. We have needs that need to be met, and we're going to get together and we're going to do something about this, you know. And it's a valid reason to get organized. What tends to happen is you meet your needs and those of your family and maybe those of your neighbors, and you can stop your engagement. Some continue. A lot of them stop when they've met their needs, principally if that was their motivating factor for beginning to get involved. Although sometimes things happen during the process of their involvement that makes them change why they're really involved. So it's no longer for their immediate needs anymore. But nonetheless, it's not a judgment. It's a very valuable reason to get involved, but often these are not those that stay at the front lines for decades. Mm-hmm. Then there's those that get involved because they're angry. Sorry, that's my mother sneezing. There's those who get involved because they're angry and they feel that there's social injustice, and this is just tremendous political, it's ideological, it's tremendous convictions. They may not have any of these needs themselves, you know, but they're angry often, and this rage gets them going for a while, but they burn out, they fizzle out. The rage either consumes them or the rage disappears and they're out. And then there's those that do it for love. They're there because they love their neighbor, because they love their community, because they love creation, because they love enough to get involved and to stay involved. And so that's the partners. These are the groups that I'm talking about. Like, they don't get demoralized despite the fact that in Bolsonaro, it seems like there's just not a lot of wins that we can have at the moment inside, which is why you need to be strategic and smart and try and have wins outside and try and get your neighbors to support you more, which is why it's so important. I can't stress this enough. It's so important that development and peace never forget that its political and social support to organizations is tremendously important and valuable to them, particularly when they're being massacred and bad-mouthed and criminalized and assassinated. You know, when we don't defend a partner, we're leaving them to dry. You know, it's bad, it's awful, it's like kind of immoral. You know, we have a duty to protect our partners. So in Brazil, we have a duty to protect our partners that are being bad-mouthed and that are being criminalized and that are being harassed. And I hope we continue to do so. Well,
that I kind of, sorry to interrupt, but kind of on that note, so we have a lot of people who are on the webinar today who are really involved in our campaign last year, and we're asking, or we're wondering, like, what happened with the letters of solidarity being offered to the Seringueiros and the Mura people, and our plans for advocacy around that. So kind of like speaking to that in a way, kind of outside action that can be taken. And so there, I responded to them that that's going to be the topic of another webinar.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
say. At the beginning of October, that will mark the end of the season of creation. But just to say quickly, you know, we had this wonderful plan for young people from the movement here in Canada, Development and Peace members, to take all those letters. You know, we have over, like, I think it's 56,000 signatures were collected in total, and to bring that solidarity down and to Brazil. And that trip, of course, got canceled because of COVID. So we are trying to come up with a wrap up kind of event that will still offer that in the best way we can in this context. So I hope people will join in for it. I'm also, so we're few enough now that I think.
Continue, or is it?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sure.
Okay,
I just want to make sure we also there's a number of people who want to ask you questions, but hey, we can hang out here as long as you're here.
I'm
as long as they're willing there, then yeah, go for it.
I'm almost done answering this question because I think it's a really important question. You know, we can't be too gloomy. So, like, working outside where you can have wins is important, but there's also wins inside of the Brazilian church, for instance, or the Latin American church, or in the Amazonian church. That's really important. The creation of Repam is, like, super important. The ongoing actions and struggles of igrejas e mineração, churches and mining, you know, it's ecumenical, you know, but we're there, you know, we're having just the fact there was a synod on the Amazon. It's a huge victory. I mean, you have to sort of have a different perspective, you know, maybe change your glasses. If you're looking for like a little local victory, then, you know, but that is significant. That's huge in the history of the church to have the synod on the Amazon and to have, you know, Querida Amazonia as a document that's written, you know, like that we can refer back to, that shows the importance of these struggles and the rights that these communities have, and the need that we have and the duty that we have to continue to help them and strengthen them and defend them so that, you know, they can continue to exist in their territories and live in human dignity and protect the environment. This is huge. I think we have to not lose sight of how significant that is. And so, but then in terms of a big win in Brazil at the moment, it's difficult, you know, but certain things are interesting. For instance, I think you can, it may feel a bit depressing, but I think you need to realize that there are times when just your ongoing presence in a territory is a win. The fact you haven't been kicked off. Like, it's reality, you know, like sometimes that's a win. It means that you're like pushing back enough that you're not being kicked off. And when the context improves and we're working for it to improve, well, them having been there will be what is extremely important for them to live there with more dignity, with more rights, with more services, with less violence, you know, because if you're no longer on the territory, then you have to return. You're like, you've gone back under zero, you know, you're no longer there. So staying sometimes is just a victory. And there's lots of little victories. There's lots, you know, the fact that the MSC has been able to distribute 3,400 tons of food to the poor in the peripheries of the cities is a victory. The fact that Justice is continuing to work agroecology in this zone that like this knows this huge pressure to turn it into like a mining dump, basically, you know, like that is a victory. You're changing people's minds slowly and you're keeping them going in the cause, buying some time perhaps, you know, but changing minds and hoping that Bolsonaro, you know, won't get reelected, or, you know, that it won't be his son or one of his sons, you know, but it's important to not lose sight of the fact that there are victories, but at the moment, you're not going to find like a ginormous, beautiful victory within the country. It's not possible. But if you don't adjust your eyes and your thinking to be able to see the victories that are there, or that are, say, in Europe or in Canada, having to do with international campaigns, then you're not understanding what's happening, and you're going to be handicapped in order to continue your support. And you're not valuing real victories. You have to give credit where credit is due. And if you can't have a victory in point A, well, then you try and have one in point B.
For sure. We're few enough. I think I've kind of covered most of the questions in the chat box. Rosemarie wanted to know if the CCCB would be endorsing the Recovering Together campaign. And Rosemarie, I can say that the makeup collections that are happening are all happening on different dates. And as a result, the CCCB is supportive of Recovering Together, but they felt that it was going to be impossible to have one national collection date given all the makeup collections that were taking place. And so they asked that we take a regional approach. So individual bishops have been supporting the Recovering Together campaign in a way that's appropriate to the diocesan context that they're in. And you know, we will see how this theme develops over the course of the year, especially once we get to Lent and where we're at Lent, where hopefully we would have, you know, the usual, for those that are on that know what the usual means, the usual letter of support that we have that goes into our materials from the CCCB around the 5th Sunday of Lent. We have a number of people who have had their hands raised for a long time. If this was a real meeting, their arms would be like so sore right now because they've been raised for a long time. And we are few enough. I think I will see if I can actually allow you who have your hands raised to talk, so you can actually pose your question verbally. Wendy, you have your hand up, so go ahead, Wendy, if you're still there, and see if you can ask your question. Are you still there, Wendy? They may not, people may not still be there, so I'm just checking in with people who had their hands up. Wendy might be trying to unmute herself. Okay, well, we're waiting to see if Wendy is able to unmute herself. Then Tim, if you are still there, you want to go ahead and ask your question. If you're still there, Tim. Okay, I'm just gonna unmute people and allow them to talk, and if any of them are still there, hopefully we'll get a question. Let's just see. Yvonne had her hand up as well too. Yvonne, if you're still there, you can go ahead and pose your question. Well, last but not least, Keith had his hand up. Keith, are you able to?
I did have my hand up, but I asked my question, and
Oh, great.
Catherine answered it very well. So no, my hand is no longer up, but I'm more than happy to stay on. I may come up with a question depending upon the ebb and flow of the discussion, but no, my hand is no longer up. I'm resting my arm.
Great. And Wendy, are you there? Okay, well, maybe this is a good time to actually stop our live stream. So I'm going to stop the live stream that's been going off on our Facebook group. So if anybody happens to be watching on Facebook, thanks for sticking around this long for the after party as well too. But I think we're going to go into the after party now. So